In the year 1711, war was waged throughout Europe. Led by the Tsardom of Russia, a rebellion was orchestrated against the Swedish Empire in northern, central, and eastern Europe. A rebellion that quickly turned into an all-out war. The Great Northern War was fought by a coalition of men. The players were Peter I of Russia, Frederick IV of Denmark-Norway, and Augustus II the Strong of Saxony-Portland, Lithuania. One day, Charles XII arrived on scene to evaluate the battle. A sapping operation was presently underway on the field. For those who do not know, a sapping operation was a term used to denote the digging of a battle trench. The purpose of the trench was to be able to approach the ground held by a besieged enemy without also being in danger of the enemy's fire. It was the safest place one could be in the middle of a battle. Charles spent a fair amount of time inspecting the trench, correctly believing that it was probably going to be the best hope of winning the battle. At some point during the inspection, Charles unexpectedly fell to the ground. For some reason, this went unnoticed by the men who were with him. However, after a few moments, it was indeed noticed, and the men ran to his aid. When they did, their blood ran cold. Charles lay motionless on the ground, dead of a single gunshot wound to his temple. His men stood in stunned silence. How had this happened? Where had the shot come from? Why had none of them seen or heard anything? Why hadn't any of these top officials noticed a shooter? Of course, a full investigation was launched. Inquiries were made, and everyone was questioned. But the subjects of the interrogation were just as much in the dark about the matter as the interrogators were. The answers in this case did not seem as though they would be forthcoming, though the same statement cannot be made of speculation. Multiple investigations were made into this matter over the years by multiple people. People consumed with the need for answers. Several people throughout history searched his body and his clothing, looking for some scrap of evidence that would lead them to the shooter. However, nothing was uncovered. The fact that there were no witnesses to this crime, in spite of there being several people around him during the incident, severely hindered the progress into the investigation. Questions were raised, no doubt, as to how nobody, not a single person who had been standing within an arm's length of Charles, saw or heard anything. Were these men guilty of some sort of collusion in a plot against him? Perhaps. That would explain a few things. It is certainly possible that there was a Swedish conspiracy against Charles, and that some Swedish version of Omerta was at play here. It was not unheard of in history, and it would happen again in history. Therefore, this theory cannot be ruled out. Did they just happen to get away with it? However, it is not the only explanation which could fit in this case. It is certainly possible that there was, in fact, gunfire, and that the sound had become something that they were so used to that nobody registered that a shot had been fired. The body of Charles XII has been exhumed on 3 separate occasions over the last 300 years. The first time was in 1746, the next in 1859, and the final time thus far was in 1917. The evidence in these cases was fully in agreement that Charles had to have been shot from the nearby fort and left no possibility for him having been shot from anywhere else. It was even determined during the course of these examinations that he had been shot with grape shot. Those are the facts that we know. However, what the examinations cannot tell us is whether or not this was a stray bullet or a purposeful shot. The solution to that question is anybody's guess. There are, after all, a few reasons to suspect that he was murdered quite intentionally. One of these reasons was what brought Charles to the battlefield in the first place: the war. It had been waged continually for 11 years or so at this point, and the end of it didn't seem as though it was anywhere to be seen on the horizon. And there were those who deemed the war to be entirely unnecessary in the first place. One popular hypothesis was that one of the people from this group of anti-war enthusiasts found himself in the curious and providential position of being a soldier on that day, with a clear view of Charles as he walked the battleground. Having been in the fort, he would also find himself taking an accidental shot that would fatally wound him. It does make sense that such a hypothesis could bear out in real life. However, there is a problem with this idea, namely that nothing was heard. Why would no sound have carried from the very nearby fort? Guns were loud, as they still are. Is it possible that another person may be responsible? It is not only a possibility, but a possibility with motive attached. Charles was one of many rulers throughout history who attempted to punish successful businessmen with a wealth tax. His plan was to impose a 17% tax on people whom he deemed to be making too much money. Needless to say, this plan did not go over well with said people, and it was not beyond the realm of possibility or of probability that some of these men formulated a conspiracy against him, which would have resulted in the events of November 30th. Though, as we have said, this is a possibility, but it does bear repeating that nothing was seen or heard that would indicate to anybody that a shot had been fired. One also has to remember that the accuracy of weapons from that time was not up to the standards of today's weapons. When a round is fired from today's weapon, grooves inside of the barrel cause it to spin upon its exit. This is done to ensure accuracy. Weapons from the 18th century, however, had no such innovation, and one had to be very close to one's target to ensure an accurate hit. Being that this is the case, it is made twice as mystifying that nobody was able to see or hear a shot. Ultimately, we don't know what happened on that field 312 years ago. But we can tell you who benefited from Charles' death. There were successful business people who no longer had an unnecessary wealth tax. Ulrika Eleonora, Charles's sister, and Palatinate Zweibrücken, who succeeded him to the Swedish throne, also benefited. As far as who it was that fired the fatal shot, well, we just have to keep wondering. If you like this content, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you on the next video.